In 2014, a woman and her child went to go to one of the earlier performances of Aladdin on Broadway. During the show, the woman got up and signaled to an usher that her child was having difficulty seeing the show, and she wanted to know if they had any booster seats available. The usher assured the woman that they could get her one, but they didn't really like disturbing the performance while it was going on. So the woman agreed to wait until intermission to get the booster seat. When intermission came, the usher got a booster seat, he brought it over to the woman, but he found that the child already had one. So the usher asked, hey, where did you get that booster seat? And the woman told him, there was a lady at the back of the theater. She kind of gestured to me where they were, so I kind of just helped myself. The usher knew that there wasn't anyone in the staff who would do something like this while the performance was going on, so he decided to investigate. And unsurprisingly, not a single member of the staff said that they had directed this woman to where the booster seats were. So in their minds, there was only two logical explanations for what happened here. Either she was lying for some reason, or it was Olive Thomas. Who's Olive Thomas? Well, let's get into that right now. Going to a Broadway show is one of the most popular things to do when people visit New York City. In fact, Broadway attendance consistently beats out attendance numbers for the New York Yankees, Mets, Giants, Jets, Rangers, Islanders, Knicks, Liberty, Brooklyn Nets, and New Jersey Devils combined. And one of the oldest Broadway theaters is the New Amsterdam Theater, which can be found on the south side of 42nd Street between 7th and 8th Avenues. The New Amsterdam Theater first opened in 1903, but it was rebuilt and reopened in 1997. That's when the Walt Disney Company took over the lease. So this theater has been home to The Lion King, Mary Poppins, and currently Aladdin. Now, whether you visit the New Amsterdam Theater to see a show, or if you work there, it doesn't really matter what entrance you go through, there will always be a photograph of a one-time Ziegfeld Follies chorus girl named Olive Thomas at each of those entrances. Now, these photographs were all placed there so that theater workers can greet her when they come in every day. Just a quick little hello, Olive, or even a wave of the hand. And these workers all agree to do this because Olive Thomas likes to haunt this theater. Many of the employees have their own personal anecdotes of interactions that they've actually had with her ghost. First, let's talk about who she was, and then we'll get into why her ghost might actually be doing this. Olive married Bernard Krug Thomas when she was only 16 years old. He would have been 22 at the time. Olive worked in a department store in Pittsburgh while she was married, but they divorced just 2 years later. Bernard said that she was too ambitious, wanting to live this big life of luxury, and from there, Olive decided she would move to New York City and she would start modeling. In fact, she eventually worked her way onto the cover of the Saturday Evening Post. Not even a resident of New York for 2 years, she joined the Ziegfeld Follies, which was this variety show filled with music, dance, and sketches. It was very popular for a long time, and she was a chorus girl for them, and a very popular one at that. So much so that she was actually asked to participate in the After Hours show in the theater's roof garden as well. These girls would perform for famous men who had plenty of money to spend. So Olive was constantly getting very generous gifts from these male patrons. And while she was doing this, Olive began having her own affair with Florence Ziegfeld himself, who was a married man at the time. And after this went on for a little while and he refused to leave his wife to be with Olive instead, she ended things with him. Shortly after this affair, she'd actually secretly married a man named Jack Pickford, who was the younger brother of Mary Pickford, who was this legendary pioneer in Hollywood. Because Olive was getting a start in a film career, she didn't want people to think that she was only able to get work because of her marriage into the Pickford family. Interestingly enough, though, most of the Pickford family didn't really approve of this partnership. News broke out about a year into their marriage anyway, and Olive started to become somewhat of a household name. Everybody knew who she was. She starred in a number of silent pictures, and everybody who wasn't a Pickford was just instantly falling in love with her. However, Olive and Jack did not have the perfect marriage. Far from it. There's a lot of speculation about what their private lives were like because, well, they kept it private. But in 1920, the two of them decided it was time to take a second honeymoon. This was a trip that they wanted to take for a very long time, but they were just never able to make it work. And so in August of that year, they finally said, you know what, it's time to take this trip. Let's save our marriage. So they went to Paris. But it was in Paris that Olive would die. This became one of the very first big Hollywood scandals. So after all, it involved one of the Pickfords, and it involved one of the most popular silent film stars. She had starred in 23 silent films in the 4-year span that she was a Hollywood actress. So what happened? Well, That's why it's a scandal. Here is the most credible account of what happened in Paris. Jack had supposedly been diagnosed with syphilis. Syphilis is a sexually transmitted disease. Whether or not Olive Thomas had the STD as well, that was never revealed. For all we know, she might not have even known that he had it. However, Jack had been taking mercury bichloride to treat his sores, and he kept this medication out in the open in a little blue bottle. And being that they were in France, this medicine was labeled in French, a language that Olive did not speak or read. And one night before bed, Olive grabbed that blue bottle, opened it up, and took these pills, probably mistaking them for sleeping pills. When taken in large quantities, that medication is poisonous, and 5 days later, she was dead. The press had a field day with this. They suggested it could have been murder, it could have been suicide. This was one of the first real media stars that the country was familiar with, and just like that, she was dead. How could she have accidentally emptied this medication into her system? It didn't make any sense to anybody. But by September 13th, 1920, the death was ruled an accident. On the return trip to America, Jack, riddled with guilt, considered throwing himself overboard until he thought about the effects his suicide would have on his family. So he ultimately decided against it. Olive's body was brought back to the States, and she now rests in a crypt at Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx. Or does she? Back at the New Amsterdam Theater, as early as the 1920s, there have been reports of people running into Olive backstage. And these sightings are kind of all over the place with what she's doing, whether she's just appearing and disappearing, or if she's talking or moving things. But the Ziegfeld Follies obviously continued after her death, and they did so all the way up until 1927. And over again, people would report that Olive had been there. It really started to freak people out. And for the next 10 years, more and more people would full-blown leave the theater because they were convinced that it was haunted. However, by 1937, the New Amsterdam Theater changed its ways. It was no longer a place for stage performances. It began operating as a movie theater instead, and it did so until 1983. And while it was that movie theater, there was no mention of any apparition of Olive Thomas. It was like this ghost was put to rest when the performances stopped. In the 1990s, when the Walt Disney Corporation took over the lease for the theater, they began an ambitious restoration project. Construction workers came in to transform the theater back to its former glory. But when this happened, in came more reports of a woman wandering through their off-limits work area carrying a blue bottle. This blue bottle would have matched the blue bottle that these pills were taken from when Olive died in Paris 75 years earlier. A very strange thing to know about for a construction worker in an era where people are just beginning to install dial-up internet in their homes. Is this even information that was available to the public without digging through newspaper archives? And what's more, multiple people who did not know each other over the years have made reports that Olive talked to them, and when they would reenact her speech patterns, all of them would make the same exact kinds of inflections. This was true of construction workers, security guards, actors, stagehands, box office employees. And then after The Lion King opened at the New Amsterdam in 1997, there was one night where a security guard was just looking to close. The performances were done for the day, and his job was just to make sure that everybody had left for the night before he locked up. While he was wandering through the theater, though, a woman began walking across the stage. That security guard shouted out to her, hey, you can't be in here, it's time to go. And the woman walked right through a solid wall and she disappeared. The security guard resigned the next day. Dana Amendola, the vice president of operations for Disney Theatrical Group, started having all of those photographs hung up at all of these entrances when he had an interaction with Olive, or so he believes. After he passed below the stage during off hours, he distinctly heard tap dancing on the boards above him. Thinking he was alone, he went up to the stage level, but nobody was there. It didn't necessarily make him into a believer, but he was certainly less skeptical and said, you know what, if we need to be a little superstitious here to make everything work, then so be it. When the New Amsterdam Theater brought Aladdin in to replace Mary Poppins, the show went through its previews, as all Broadway shows do before they officially open. And during those previews, they had a female replacement conductor. Now, something that all of the Olive Thomas ghost believers feel is that she is a big flirt and only messes around with men at the theater. She typically doesn't bother the women. But this female conductor, she's feeling nervous before the show, and even though she'd conducted for Mary Poppins, she still felt like she needed Olive Thomas's blessing before curtain. And so she's sitting in her dressing room, and she felt like she needed to summon Olive and ask for that blessing. So she spoke out loud. She said, well, Olive, I'm back again, and I'm a little nervous, I just wanted to introduce myself again and ask if you could please give me some good luck." And she sat back in her chair wondering, like, how weird am I that I've just asked a ghost that I've never seen before for some good luck? And then she wondered out loud, I wonder what the Follies girl would have thought of a female conductor. And after making that statement, 4 of the round dressing room bulbs that were all new, they had just been replaced for this new show, these lights flickered on and off for a few seconds before stopping. And the conductor took that as a sign from Olive that she was okay with the idea. Amendola has always stated that they don't mind that they have a ghost at the theater. In fact, they kind of embrace the idea of there being a ghost because Olive, at the very least, is always friendly. She never does anything mean-spirited, it's almost like she's just being playful, and she also never shows up when people are looking for her. It's almost like she only appears right around the time that people begin to forget about her, or she'll show herself to people that have never heard about her before. The female conductor, that was kind of a rare exception. Regardless, it has caused the theater a few problems in the past because word has gotten out about this ghost. Whoops. And now people will sometimes come to a show and then try to hide in the theater after the show ends. That way they might interact with her. So the staff is now required to do a special sweep of the theater at the end of the night just to be sure that there's no lurkers in the New Amsterdam Theater. Ushers have claimed to have ridden the elevator with her, to have their walkie-talkies moved by her, listened to her play random instruments in the orchestra, but again, all of it is just harmless kinds of pranks. So that's going to do it, everyone. This is not the only haunted Broadway theater, but certainly the one that people seem to give the most, I don't know if credibility is the right word, but this seems to be the theater that people believe the most, maybe. Why would her ghost be haunting this theater in the first place? Was it because her death was not really an accident? Was it to get back at some of the wrongdoings that took place in the theater? Participation in a married man's affair? Nude art being distributed after her death? Or is it simply because she's a party girl and this is just one big game to her? Whatever the case may be, it does seem like it's just harmless fun. I'd be curious to hear if you've ever had any experiences with a ghost before. Why don't you throw that in the comments section below? Also, quick announcement for the month of October. I will be releasing videos that maybe have a little bit more of a spooky kind of edge to them, so if you don't want to miss out on that, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that little notification bell so you don't miss out on any of those uploads. Until next time, I'm Mike, the NYC Storyteller. Deuces, kids.